Welcome to Zambition, the channel on which we engage in dialogue with leaders from across sectors and generations. Greetings and welcome to Zambition. My name is Martin Kalungubanda, your host on this channel. Today, I am super delighted to have as our guest someone whose work and thought processes have fascinated me since my college and university days. His name is Dr. Akashambatwa Mbikusita-Lewanika, a Pan-African revolutionary. He was the convener and founder, Secretary General or National Secretary for the movement for multi-party democracy. He became a member of parliament and a cabinet minister. Later on, he was special assistant to the president. Prior to that, he had been managing director for the Tanzania-Zambia Railways, TAZARA. He was also group director of projects in Indeco. He describes himself as a community development activist. He is a scholar and an author not only of books, but also a number of significant chapters in our country's history. He is also Prince in Barotseland. Dr. Mbikusita-Lewanika, welcome to Zambition.
Thank you very, very much. It's great to contact you once again.
I would like to begin by inviting you to share with us the journey you have walked so far. I know it's a rich and deep journey, but what would be the key highlights on that journey?
Basically, I was born into the heat of political movement, and it also turned out to be the trade union movement, because my father, apart from being the first President General of the Northern Rhodesia African Congress in 1948, he had earlier from 1945 to 48 been a field worker campaigning for the start of trade unionism in Zambia. And also in 1944, he was the president of the Kitu African Society, having earlier in 1929 been the secretary of the first urban African Association. The first association was rural in Mwenso, headed by Mr. Swale, Donald Swale. So the second one was in Livingstone, but it was the first in the urban area. So I was born with this, into this, I had a lot of exposure to this knowledge, so that it was an opportunity also, which, so from a very early age, I knew that my father had met Mr. Kenyatta in Kenya. I knew that my father, and I knew all the colleagues of my father who later on became basically the pioneers. Since some people have gotten the title of being founders of Zambia, I think there is also the pioneers of that movement that led to Zambia being founded. Yeah. So within our neighborhood in Usakile, we had people like Mr. Lawrence Katirungu, for instance. He was our neighbor. And I remember in 1953, when my father and mother went to England, they went together with Mr. Katirungu. So that the place I was born at in Usakile turned out to be the incubator for the pioneer leaders of the movement, of the trade union movement, the political movement, as well as the social welfare movement. And these gentlemen were also the community leaders.
Yeah.
So that was first my earliest experience and early memories. And I think those formed my background, although I was not consciously trying to follow that background, although later on it coincided with what I later got engaged in.
And when you reflect back on such a history, you were born into some kind of new history unfolding, and you were part of it. How did that shape your later years as a student, as a learner, getting into employment and beginning to find your own path?
It has shaped me very decisively, but it was not like shaping me to be a politician. Far from it, because our parents, not only my father but his generation of leaders, were amazing. You know, they were not professional politicians. They were actually total community leaders.
Mm-hmm.
So they entered politics as part of their community leadership, because they were among those who were a little bit more educated than the average, a little bit more exposed than the average, and they felt it duty bound to use that extra knowledge, that extra enlightenment, that lesser to pull their fellow Africans up. I remember visiting Mr. Makasa in Chinsali, and he was telling me that as a young man, when he joined the welfare department under my father,
Mm-hmm.
afterwards, my father would actually have the young people who were a little educated, and these would be standard 4, standard 6, in other words, primary school educated, but regarded as being more educated than the average African at that time, and actually take them through courses. And say one of the courses he took them is how to conduct meetings, and which was quite away from their real mainline jobs. So they were community leaders in the broad sense. They not only my father, but others like Mr. Donald Swale, apart from being in the Welfare Association and being part of the founders of the Northern Rhodesia African Congress, they also translated the Bible. And both my father and Mr. Swale translated the Bible and also translated Pilgrim's Progress. And it's very interesting that if you look at the whole of Southern Africa,
Mm-hmm.
even the founder of the African National Congress in South Africa, John Dewey, also contributed translating the Bible, and this amazing book which the early missionaries found so necessary to introduce to Africa, Pilgrim's Progress. And also that generation also was amazing in the sense that they were different personalities.
In which
They
way?
were not copycats of each other.
Mm-hmm.
In the sense that Mr. Katilungu was Mr. Katilungu. I mean, he didn't dress like my father, he didn't talk like my father, and he didn't have the same opinion as my father. But despite these different backgrounds and these different personalities, they were able to work together. And they could only work together because they had team. In fact, the first slogan of Congress, the African National Congress, the Northern Rhodesia African Congress, had 2 slogans. One was one man, one vote, which is very known. But the other one was leadership through team spirit.
Mm.
And I think that that is the spirit of collective leadership, of team spirit that we have lost. By the time we got our independence, we had totally lost the idea of collective leadership. We had completely turned into personalized leadership, hero worship leadership. Rather than have a team with diverse contributors to leadership, you had praise singers for one leader. And up to now, Zambia's problem is that we have completely not recovered that initial heritage of team leadership, of collective leadership, and of people being to be themselves differ but still be working together politically, economically, in trade union, differ with each other but still be friends, differ with each other, but their children will never even know that their parents have political differences. That is the sort of environment in which I grew up, and I was very conscious of it earlier than most people would have been conscious of all these forces.
I just wanted to now fast forward to a moment I have always wondered. At the time, I was a student at the University of Zambia, 1990-91. You convene a meeting of some individuals that later on came to be the leadership of the movement for multi-party democracy. Weren't you scared of the consequences of beginning to talk about something that would lead to the government of the time losing power?
I think I was young enough to have audacity and naive enough to think that what I dared do can be done. And in fact, part of our success, and I say success with not triumphantly, because I think we have not succeeded in our mission, but at least in changing government, was the fact that we were different from those who wanted to change the government before. Many of the people wanted to change the one-party state, either had been fired or they were in government, they had personal bitterness, or they wanted to do it secretly, or they wanted to use the army. We had the audacity to do it openly, and to do it non-violently, and to do it constitutionally, but to be very insistent on our human rights and civil rights, to be able to ask for, to demand for change. It was not accidental or instant, because when I returned from my university overseas, I joined Indeco, the Industrial Development Corporation. First with Indico Milling in Dola, a milling company which had mills in various parts of the provinces. Secondly, with National Milling, which also had a few main mill in Lusaka, Kabwe, Livingstone, and so on. Then I became group director of projects, industrial projects, which were in all sectors, whether they were chemicals or whatever it is. So that it is in the course of that work, particularly when I focused on Mansa batteries and Chipata bicycles, because our feasibility studies was that the battery factory should be in Kabwe, which was already a dying town, but it produced some of the metals that was needed in dry cell batteries. And also it was near Kapiri and Serenge, where they had other raw materials that we needed. But the politicians directed us to take that project to Mansa. As professionals, we had to justify it. And our justification was that we are taking employment to the rural areas. We are taking industries to the rural areas. We are bringing modernity to the rural areas, and so on. But after constructing Mansa batteries, and I was involved in it from feasibility study to clearing the ground, to importing machinery, to working out the finances and borrowing money where we get money from government, as well as employing people. And after we had finished that, after commissioning, and if anybody who's been involved in project development knows that your best day is commissioning day, when you really give birth to something positioned in a place where there was nothing. But in the middle of my excitement over that, I was disturbed by observing that out of all the people we had employed in Mansa batteries, only 4 were local. Only 4 came from Luapula.
And the rest?
I mean, and 3 of the 4 were security guards. The conclusion of my further studies and my thesis and my book, Milk in the Basket, is that we needed not only to liberalize the economy, but also to liberalize the political space by introducing democracy, by changing the constitution from a one-party state to a multi-party constitution, which we had inherited at independence. So when I came, I was fired up. I was already fired up the first time I came from school in 75. This time I was more fired up because I even had more experience in the country, on the copper belt, in Lusaka, in industry, and so on. So I was very clear in my mind that there was a path to solve Zambia's problem. In my naivety, I thought it was possible to do it in broad daylight and to do it openly. So that is the spirit with which we went to Guardian. But it's not so much that we were fearless, but that we had the spirit of youth, the spirit of audacity to defy our own fears. And also we had the ignorance of how the system really worked, I must confess. Those who knew KK when it was KK, those who knew UNIP when it was fire, those who knew a one-party state when it was really in full flight,
yes,
would have not been as openly against it as we were, who were a little bit outside, because I was never a member of UNIP really. Mm-hmm. Although once one of my workers who sympathized with me once bought me a UNIP card when I was general manager of ceramics, because they had this. He thought I was too young to understand how much risk I was taking, because I had informed him that I was not UNIP. Rather than discuss with me, he brought me a card.
Yeah, that's a very interesting story, actually, because as a student, as I said earlier on, we wondered, it was easier for us to begin to join the movement, but we needed people who could stand up, make the first step. I come back to the present moment. In your opinion, including the one you have already highlighted, hero worshipping of our leaders, what would you say are the biggest challenges we are facing as a country? And what has led us to this point?
As I said, gradually towards independence, we copied from other earlier independent countries like Ghana, on the assumption that one man can be the father of the nation, one man can be the liberator, and that sort of thing. And it was fashionable, because if you oppose colonialism, you also, which was associated with capitalism, also looked to the East, to the socialist part, and they were all one-party states. And a generation older than us actually admired Russia, admired the Soviet Union, because it was a backward country when the revolution came. But within 10 years, it was able to make strides towards industrialization. And therefore, it was thought that if you want development, democracy was a luxury you couldn't afford. It is a waste of time to consult. It's a waste of time. If you have the right thing, you do it. And if you know you are doing the right thing, you do it without necessarily being democratic about it. So you can't completely blame Zambian leaders, because it was almost fashionable in the generation earlier from us, worldwide, that our biggest heroes worldwide, in opposition to the capitalists and the colonialists, tended to be dictators in one-party states, and tended not to think that two equally patriotic people can hold a different viewpoint. That if you differed with the president, it is just the next thing to treason, that sort of thing. So that, but it started before independence. But unfortunately, it was enshrined in the Zambian constitution in various ways. One, by coincidence, towards independence, the British had already decided that this direct colonialism business doesn't make sense. It's too costly. There was a cheaper way, neo-colonialism. So you could give countries independence as long as you control their politics and their economy. It is cheaper, more efficient, and then you can present yourself as a nice guy who has liberated people. So that in that process where Zambia was concerned, more than any other African country, the path towards Zambia's independence, one, was speeded up, although, of course, those who were fighting for independence thought it was too slow, because if you held a rally in 1960 and asked people what do they want, they'll say independence. When do you want it? They'll say it's now. But with hindsight, and in comparison to the other countries, you could see that Zambia's path to independence was speeded up. In 1962, for the first time, a majority of Africans go to the Legislative Council. Then in 1964, January, there was another election. After that election, when UNIP won that election, it was decided to now speed up the negotiation to independence. So from January to May, the final negotiation of independence, which included sorting out the Barosland issue through the Barosland Agreement. It included agreeing on the Constitution of Zambia in May, so that it was only after the Barosland Agreement was signed in May that you could go ahead with the Northern Rhodesia, because before that you didn't know whether when Northern Rhodesia becomes independent, will it be with or without Barosland? So first you settled that question, so that now in July, the British Parliament passed a constitution of Zambia bill, which is really the first constitution of Zambia, on the agreement that there will be no other election, that on October the 24th, without any other elections, the person who is leader of the majority party in Parliament will not become prime minister, but will immediately become president, and Zambia will immediately become a republic. That is what I mean, that it was speeded up. But what was most important is that the British were very happy to grant a Zambian constitution which combined the American presidentialism with the British parliamentary system, and which made the president all powerful. Debate towards this constitution, they are very open. They said they could only do this because they had faith in Kenneth Kaunda. As I said, since there was not going to be another election after the Zambian constitution, also included in the constitution that Kenneth Kaunda, who was already leader of the majority party, would be president of Zambia when it becomes independent a few months later. It was really a very poor drafting of a law. Because supposing he had died in May or died in June, then, when you have a name, not even saying the leader of the opposition or the leader of the majority party, but you named it. So that this conglomerated the powers. However, there was opposition to this, or at least there were concerns over this. The Barosland were concerned that if you have such an all-powerful presidency, then even this Barosland agreement may not be honored after independence. The minority party, the African National Congress, which was already a minority party, also was worried that with this concentration of power in the presidency and in the ruling party, there may be no room for the opposition party, and that whatever room the first constitution provided could be withdrawn anytime. The Europeans needed assurance that there was not going to be so-called reverse racism, but there is nothing like reverse racism. still a racism or not, but anyway, you know what I mean. So the second part was that, of course, the nature of the economy Zambia inherited and that colonial Northern Rhodesia created had white dominance. In other words, the industry was dominated by the white. They were the ones with the most property. This is why, without having to write a racist law stopping Africans from voting, they could write an economically driven law to say that everybody can vote unless if you have a house, if you have an income of this level. And the majority of people with those economic assets were whites. So they were also concerned about dispossession economically. So they needed assurances. Now, the negotiation that went on were give and take. So having agreed that there will be a Barasland agreement, or there will be recognition of the leader of the opposition and the opposition in parliament, and there will be no reverse racism and there will be no property grabbing, then those who were granted that comfort needed double assurance that, but how do we know that after independence, this dominant presidency would respect those? So what was agreed was to anchor these compromises, these agreements, with a referendum clause. And this referendum clause said, you can't change a comma in the constitution without a referendum. It will be approved by more than 50% of the people who are eligible to vote. Now, after independence, when the celebration of independence was going down and the debate within the ruling party was growing, it became quite clear that this hurdle was too much, that there could never be a partisan constitutional proposal which could overcome that hurdle of a referendum. The election in 1968 completely confirmed this changed situation. Those in UNIP who wanted to pretend that they were Democrats, they were not going to impose a one-party state, had hoped that the next election after independence, they would win all the seats, the way Nyerere almost won, and create a one-party state. You could then say it's the people voted that way. But the election in '68 showed clearly that there will never come a day in Zambia where one party would win all the seats in parliament. So immediately after the '68 election, they introduced a deceitful clause, a referendum to end all referenda, by projecting that the referendum clause itself was an imperialist imposition, which was preventing them from giving out land to Africans in Mazabuka, difficult to reverse whatever disadvantages Africans had, which was false. But it won the day everywhere in Zambia except in Barosland. And the reason it lost in Barosland was that in 1967, at the UNIP conference, all the key Lozi leaders lost the election. So the Barosi population was already fearing that things after independence will not be as rosy and buddy-buddy as they were before independence or in the struggle towards independence. Now, I'm saying that to answer your question elaborately, but to answer specifically, that the core problem in Zambia is that result of that referendum in '69. Because that referendum provided a ruling party in Zambia, which at that time was UNIP, now it's PF, next time it could be any other one, the power to change the constitution without a referendum. In other words, it disempowered Zambian people from being the drivers of any constitutional change. So when Zambians complain about Bill 12 or a particular law which changes the constitution, I worry that they are not looking at the issue deeply. It's not whether or not a particular change in the constitution is good or bad, but it's whether or not it is caused by demand and by sanction of all the people. And as long as, so in other words, to correct Zambia, I know maybe I can, before you ask me my Zambia ambition, is that I wish, I can't even call it a Zambia ambition because I'm so disappointed.
Yeah.
I do not see Zambians being serious enough to dig deeply into history, to find the roots of this problem. Not on personal, that it is Lungu or it's Kaunda or it's Chiruba or it's Sata, no. Say what are the issues and what are the roots of these issues? And the root is that referendum clause. And it was voted for by the majority of Zambians. So all the Zambians who voted yes for that are responsible for that. So that it's not something you can lump on a present leader. So that is the start of the problem, and that's where any real genuine solution, principled solution, must start. To take back the power of the people of Zambia over changing anything in the constitution, not just the Bill of Rights or select parts, and to disempower parliament as it was in the independence dispensation. That parliament cannot make the constitution makes parliament. So that is really one of the, now that fault, which is illustrated by the result of 69, is the one that leads to personalized leadership. I know the culture was already there, but now it has been sanctioned, it has been super empowered, and it has made into a Zambian political culture. That my disappointment is that I do not see African Zambian vying for leadership of Zambia, who seem to recognize how deep-rooted the problem is, how impersonal the problem is. It's not about a party, it's not about a person, it's not about today. It is in the DNA of Zambia's faith, which means to correct it, you need people who are prepared to face the root cause of our problem, the fundamental fault line of our problem, which leads to the personalization of leadership, which leads to empowering a ruling party to capture the state, which leads to turning citizens into simple followers, which leads to a situation where even after bringing back multi-party democracy, because we did not change that fundamental thing, the constitution we have, never mind that Zambia is a Christian nation and all this stuff, or 50+1, those don't even touch power sharing at all. Despite all these changes, the Zambian constitution remains fundamentally a one-party constitution.
Dr. Mbikusita-Lewanika, as always, it has been incredibly fascinating learning from your knowledge of our history. I especially love the fact that you do not situate the key challenge we face as a country in one person or one political party. We will explore how to resolve our key challenge in part 2 this Thursday. In the meantime, I invite those of you who have been following this dialogue to reflect on the painting that has arisen from the conversation. See you on Thursday.